two-dimensional chart and the sort of progression. So we've called out a red place that where we think the current state is, which is basically using existing data and very basic analytical techniques that the banking system is putting in place now. And we believe that there is a possibility, by the way, to have a journey across both of these axes. And by the way, you don't need to go through the diagonal. There could be means by which you could bring model sophistication using analytical sophistication that you bring in the techniques discontinuously to the data moving in. Equally, data adding a lot of value where others will not. I have a couple of quick cases that I have beyond this that I'm going to whiz through and maybe try and save a little bit of time for questions. So we look at, for example, alternate data and the means by which we use alternate data. And I talked about the way it can be done. Traditional banking data complemented by utility data, telecom data, medical payment obligations, rental housing, non-traditional financial products, and so on and so forth. We do something interesting in the UK. We actually pick up rental data, rent agreements that are registered, and we use the rental data to actually build the credit history for consumers. And this is a voluntary service, the consumers allow this. This is the best means by which they can build a history before they actually start going for a mortgage loan. Amazing product because it actually ensures that this data is used logically. Many of us would have used, would have stayed in rented apartments before we bought our own, or might be doing that even now as we speak. This is valuable credit history of yours that is getting lost to the financial system. There's means by which you can capture it, great amount of sense that it can make. So if you look at the amount of value, so we did a lot of work in trying to analyze this data and possibly focus more on the prime and the thick files. You'll notice that if you add a trade, the amount of information value, the predictability that it brings to the data actually goes up substantially. And there's a means by which you can use this. And by the way, while these seem like 10% increases, a bank today will give a hand and a leg to ensure that they are able to get a 5% increase in predictability. There's a means of using social data as well, perhaps more relevant to commercial entities than to consumer entities at this point in time, because there's information across multiple sources that commercial entities are okay to put out. Now, about let's say 40% of the lending within India in the consumer space actually happens to the self-employed. There's means by which this information can be used to actually put together some kind of a profile of the consumer, a huge amount of value that it can add. The way to do this will be to actually use all of that information and to bring that all together using different means of linkages that you can find in the data using ML techniques that are fairly standardized. The key is possibly more in terms of variable definitions, in terms of things that you need to put in place there. But I'm going to talk about the uses that you can make of all of these. For instance, you could actually build a scorecard that says equivalent to, let's say, a CIBIL usage. This is the amount of score that a person has. You would use it to set an adaptive limit, like I spoke about earlier, do income estimation, lifestyle segmentation, and so on and so forth. There are other things like segmentation, moving on to the customer management side of the journey, in putting data, consumer data together, along with, let's say, segmentation and location details that can add a lot of value. For instance, if you actually look at the propensity modeling, using a lot of work that you can do in terms of building sophistication, using, let's say, location data to add details to segmentation, as well as actionability. There's a lot of things that can be done. The sort of final thought that I wanted to leave with all of you is, while all of this is great and analytics is wonderful to have, often we've seen that the gap is actually in the implementation, and which is why we believe that for the retail banking, as for any other industry, to basically put together a convincing model on what they want to do on the analytics plane. The key is to ensure that there is base infrastructure that you're setting up. So for instance, that you have a clear data mart that you've set up right in the beginning, that you have data processes that are feeding information, creating a large enough data store for you to do the analytics. There's actionability that you're bringing in through use of software, like business rule engines, etc., that your systems can core interface with, that will let you focus on things that can be done, and a core decisioning as a service layer that you sort of built for the organization. I'm going to pause there and ask if there are any quick questions that come in. It seems like we have a couple of minutes before the end of the session.
Hi.
Sorry, I can hardly see anybody. Yes.
Hi. I'm Karthik from Quantium. Some
Karthik.
of the things you spoke about, the version 2.0 part of it, we do this in the Australian market. We have exclusive access to banks' data, retailers' data,
Sure.
media data, and all. My question to you is, in Indian market, do you think the banks are ready? I know you have the credit data, but do you think the banks are ready to share, let's say, the debit transaction information to a neutral party so that there is retailer data coming in, so that there are insights and stuff?
The answer is in two places, right? My pitch here is not so much for you to take work from the banks as much as for analytics to be done. My argument is that the banks can do this themselves or get it done. The important thing is that they need to realize that it needs to get done. The moment that happens, I think whether they get it done internally or externally is a sort of moot point, right? I mean, that's a secondary level decision. The core question that you're asking is the banking system ready to do this right now? I'd make the point that it is ready discontinuously. So is the public sector banking system ready? Perhaps not. Are there private sector banks and foreign banks that are ready for this side of the journey? Yes, there are many of them that are actually wanting to do cutting edge stuff to take things forward. So it's not, Indian market is not a sort of uniform Australian market where you, by the way, look at the Australian challenge. They have 20 million people. Whatever they do, they have to sell it only to those people, right? You can't do too much about it.
Yes.
We have 1.3 billion. I mean, the issue has to be different. Any other questions, any thoughts? Yes, please. Sure.
The question is associated, is there any project which was implemented by you, taking alignment with telco, retail, and banking sector data?
All together.
Yes.
We've done this in other parts of the world, not so much in India right now. So for example, as we speak, let's say telco, the handset financing is a big part of what the telcos are trying to get into, not so much in India as in other parts of the world. But how does this work? The bank, risk is actually backstopped with the bank. So what I do is I use the payment data of let's say the call data or the usage data of the telcos in conjunction with the banking data of the consumer to set a credit limit to let them buy a handset which might be paid over a 12, 24-month installment. In the US, for instance, this is actually almost a part of daily life, right? You buy it in 12-month cycles. The Apple upgrade happens and you go and buy the iPhone 7 and the iPhone 8 and so on and so forth. The work that's getting done in the background is actually in terms of using all of this information to set the limits and to take it forward. Increasingly, the telcos are coming to the view that carrying that credit risk is not their core business. So they're very happy to let the banks do it or let a financial institution or a financial part of their business carry this. So yes, there are projects that are happening which are using a conjunction of data across everybody to be able to do this. And by the way, if you have a retail organization that's coming in, you might be able to find the retail history and use that to increase predictability as well. So yes, we are doing projects that are involving information from across everybody. It gets more complex when there are more entities involved because data ownership is very large. So getting the collaboration going is much more difficult than the modeling.
A supplementary question is, then what about privacy and legal framework associated with the privacy?
So privacy is a genuine concern for us, which is why, for instance, a lot of the work that we do is actually keeping that in context. As increasingly, for instance, consumers are starting to give out data, the context of using that information appropriately is very important. So a lot of the work that we do actually, for instance, anonymizes this information. The only people who will have access to that information might be somebody like Experian. Our core business is actually providing that data security. What we do fundamentally is we are a FTSE 25 company that's only focused on ensuring data security. So a lot of people give us the data, we anonymize it, and we give them actionability at the level of that individual consumer, masking any other data so that if there are 3 of you want to share data and you don't want to do it to each other, you can give it to me as a neutral entity and I can get it done. And that's the way the model works.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. I presume that's the questions. Thanks. Good speaking to you.
Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. If you have any questions, you can meet Mr. Mohan offline. It's a quick coffee break time. We have about 20 minutes left. 11:40 we will start our next presentation. So we'll request you to as cooperative as you have been the last 2 days, we'll request you to come back in time, help us start. Thank you. Also, there are some changes in the schedule. All the updated version is on the app. So if you have the app, you can go to schedule and see the updated version in case of any confusion.